The purpose of this video is to show somebody who has never estimated a house how to estimate a house, and hopefully by the end you'd be able to go out and estimate the exterior painting of a home and be within plus or minus 5%. So I may say some things that seem a bit obvious or maybe a bit redundant, but that is because we are trying to take somebody who's never estimated and show them how to estimate. So we're going to jump right into it. We have this estimate sheet that we use here, and this estimate sheet is going to do all the math for us. But basically what it's doing is we have some inputs here, and we're saying that spraying siding, we can do 200 foot per unit, and then this is going to figure out how many units is that, and then it's also going to tell us, based on what the paint costs and what we're paying our painters, how much we should be charging. So the first thing on this list, we're going to skip prep for right now because you need to actually see the whole home to be able to determine how much prep is on it. So we usually do that at the end, and we will come back to prep before this is over. But the very first thing we want to do is we want to know the length of the first story and the length of the second story. So for this home, the length is actually going to be computed from knowing where it starts on the bottom to where it ends on the bottom. It could start here, end here, but if you were to take a tape measure and lay it from here all the way over to there, that would be the length of the first story. The second story is not always the same length as the first story. So in this home, for example, we would measure from here to here. Again, we're looking towards the bottom, and we're going to measure from right here to right here, and that length is different than the length from here to here. You can see there is an extra that amount. So when it comes to estimating, we are not trying to be 100% precise and accurate. You can get more and more accurate, but that takes more and more time. And the way that I'm going to teach you to estimate here, we have found over the years, what we're sacrificing in accuracy, we make up for in time. If you wanted to be 100% accurate on this house, you could probably spend over 8 hours just getting every little detail correct. But we want to be able to do this, within 15-20 minutes so that we can do a lot of estimates and do it in a reasonable amount of time. So with that being said, when we're measuring from one side to the other, we only go in 5-foot increments. So it's either 5 foot, 10 foot, 15 foot, 20 foot, and we pretty much do that for almost everything we estimate. And we never do more than a 2.5 foot increment. But for most of the things we estimate, we're going to go in 5. So it would be, this house might be 30 foot, 35 foot, or 40 foot. We don't actually put 33 foot or 34 foot. When we're measuring this side, using a tape measure would be most accurate. You can even use a wheel where you roll it along the ground and it gives you a pretty accurate measurement. So let's say that you get 33, we're going to round up to 35. And if you get 32, we're going to round down to 30 so that we're always taking the closest 5. And again, for that accuracy versus time analogy, we get really good at making a step for us 3 foot. So if you're really tall, it's not going to be that big of a step for you. And if you're really short, you want to make sure you're taking a big step to where you start to feel a little bit of a stretch. You can do practice with that. You can measure out 9 feet and then take 3 steps and make sure you're dead on. Or measure 21 foot and make sure you're coming out to exactly 7 steps. So the reason we do that method is, again, it just saves a ton of time. So we just actually paste this out and we figure out how many steps that is. Sometimes when you're working on a home, it's going to have a hill. So for instance, here you're going to be walking on a hill. And if you're walking on a hill, it's always best to walk uphill, don't walk downhill. What we found is when you walk downhill, your count tends to be off more than if you're walking uphill. So when you're measuring, if you're going to be doing the step method and you're taking steps from here all the way up to the front here, walk uphill and you'll be a lot more accurate than if you walk downhill. So we pace starting here on the edge right here, lined up with this pillar and the foundation or the front porch concrete there. We're going to pace all the way over just on the sidewalk or on the grass and driveway. Usually there's a sidewalk down at the bottom, nice flat area to walk on. We're going to pace over to this edge. Now, when we actually did this, we got 11 steps. Now, if you take the 11 and every step or pace is 3 foot, you're going to get 11 times 3 is 33 foot. But again, we go to the closest 5. So the length of the first story, we're going to put a 35 right here. Now, when we're getting the length of the second story, we're actually going to start here instead of here. Again, it's on the ground, so you're actually starting, right here, and we're going to pace over to the edge right there. When we did that, we got 10 steps. 10 times 3 is 30, so we're going to put 30 for the length of the second story. As you get better at this, you'll learn a couple little tricks. One thing I do is, I pace out from here to here and I go 10, then I turn around and I pace out from here to here and I subtract that from 10. So now that we have the lengths, we know every story is going to be 10 foot for us. Now, this might be a little bit more than 10 and this might be a little bit less than 10. But again, giving up time for accuracy, we're always going to say every single story is 10 foot. And I do realize, this might be 12, and I do realize here it might be 8, and here it might be, 9, but every story is 10 foot. So what's nice about that is you're going to take the length of the first story, length times width, base times height for a rectangle gives you the surface area, which is going to be 35 times 10, 350. Okay, now we also need to include the second story, and 30 times 10 is another 300. So 350 plus 300 is a total of 650 square foot on the front. Now again, we're not going to subtract, this garage door, or these windows, or this front door. We're not going to add in the extra area up on these triangles up here. We're going to keep it simple. We're going to say it's 650 square foot of siding on the front. We're not going to subtract trim or anything else like that. Now, when it comes to siding spray, we have a lot of different options that we can do when we're going to apply the paint to the siding. And really, it's up to the client or customer on how they want their house painted. And if they don't have preferences, we're obviously going to give our recommendations. But let's say that the homeowner is really stern on, I don't want any sprayer at my house, I want everything brush and rolled. You can change the application method to siding roll, means it's siding and we're going to roll it. And you can see it's going to change our unit converter. It's going to divide by 125 instead of by 200. We have a lot of different options in here. We have had clients that really wanted us to brush all of their siding. They did not want anything rolled. They did not want anything sprayed. But you pretty much have every application you can. Now, if it's brick or if it's stucco, make sure you use these because brick and stucco does take a little bit longer to spray, brush, or roll. Popular option, if they do like rolling, I always recommend spraying the siding with a light back roll, and it'll spit out the numbers for you. But 99% of people are going to be fine with spraying the body, brush and roll to trim. So we're going to keep it there, and now we have the correct number in this box. Okay, so with siding, we got some other things that are going to come up. So first, let's cover Hardie board or cement fiber board. It's hard to tell sometimes from a picture. This one, I can easily tell that this is a cement fiber or Hardie board. And the easiest way for me to tell is I go up and I knock on the siding. If I knock on it and it sounds like wood, then it's wood. But if it sounds kind of like concrete, then it's concrete. And after you've knocked on it once or twice, you'll be able to tell the difference from that. Another easy way to tell is the Hardie board tends to crack like this, versus wood will never do that. What's happening is when they drive the nail in right here, it's causing it to split, kind of like a rock or like concrete would. And that's why you get these splits right on the nail head. The reason I bring this up is when you're at a homeowner's house, you want to address two things always with Hardie. First thing is you want to get the lighting right and see if there's any sheen. So you want to check all four sides and look at it where the sun is in front of you and the sun is coming down and hitting the Hardie board, and you want to see if it is flat or a satin. Exterior homes should be painted in those two. It's very rare if it's anything else, and it really shouldn't be painted anything else other than flat and satin. And if you can't see any sheen at all on all four sides, it means that the Hardie board was painted in the flat, and you want to recommend painting it in flat again to keep it consistent. And the reason you want to do that is the first time this house was painted, if they didn't put enough paint on the house and you go back and you change it from flat to satin, it's very likely to have a lot of flashing or holiday or lat marks, whatever you want to call them, but it's gonna have inconsistency in the sheen. And sometimes you get lucky and it's fine, but that's very, very common on Hardie board, and it's actually pretty difficult to get a nice consistent sheen on Hardie board. So I would definitely recommend repainting it in the flat. If it's already been painted with a satin, then you should be okay painting it in satin again. But that's something to look out for, and definitely write that on the contract, painting it in flat, and you will save a lot of trouble in production if you just keep it with flat. Since we're learning about estimating, I'm not going to get into the details with that, but that's the first thing you want to notice with when it's Hardie board. Specify whether you're going to paint it in satin or flat, and it's always safer to paint it in flat, so if you can, do that. The second thing is, what's very counterintuitive is with siding, they usually have little pieces of metal flashing that go in between these boards here that hide this gap. With Hardie board, you don't have to do that. You can leave that without there, and many homeowners want this caulked, want this area caulked, and it seems like that's the smart and right thing to do. Now, we definitely can caulk it, but it will have issues basically as these siding boards are going to heat up and cool down. And when they heat up, this gap is going to get smaller. When they cool down, this gap is going to get bigger. So let's say that it's 50 degrees out, you caulk this and paint it, and then a couple months later it's 100 degrees. This gap gets small, and it's actually going to push that caulking out. And then you're going to see like little bits of white there because the sides of the caulking weren't painted. So it looks, a little weird, and it tends to crack and fall out over time. We actually show the homeowners this straight from James Hardie, the actual manufacturer, and they explain like you don't have to put those siding, those flashing joints in there, but they also say they recommend that you don't caulk. And the reason for that is it's just going to look a little ugly over time and start to have issues. So it is counterintuitive, but you should talk about that with your homeowner. If they want you to caulk them, no big deal. But what we're trying to say is, hey, if we caulk these because you requested it, we don't want to come back and do warranty work when it starts to fall out, when it starts to crack, when you start to see like, hey, it looks like you missed a spot. It's like, no, it's because we painted it when it was 60 degrees out. Now that it's 100, it pushed the caulk out, and now you can see like little white spots on the side where it looks like we might have missed it, but it wasn't actually missed. Those are just some of the issues that happen with it. Now, if we do caulk it, it's not going to be the end of the world. It's not going to cause any damage. It's really an appearance thing, and beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So if the homeowner wants it caulked, we can caulk it to appease their opinion on what looks good and what doesn't look good. What we're trying to tell them is, if you do caulk it, in our opinion, later down the road, it's going to create ugly spots. All right, when it comes to measuring siding, this house, you could argue, is quite difficult. There's a lot of things going on here. So I want to address a few of the things. One is this 1 or 2 stories? Well, it looks like here's 1 story. Looks like this is, I don't know, a half a story. And what about this masonry material down here? Do I count that as, siding, even though we're not painting that? Whenever you're in doubt, always err on the high side. So if you have a situation like this and you're not sure if it's 1 or 2 stories and you're trying to get a hold of your manager and figure out if what it is, just count it as 2 stories. If you always err on the high side, you'll never be wrong. And there are some situations, we're not going to get, technical with it and be like, oh, this is 16 foot, so multiply it by that. We're going to stick to that rule of 5. It's either going to be multiplied by 10 for 1 story or 20 for 2 stories. And in some cases, if it's a true 1.5 stories, you could multiply it by 15. We found that trying to be more accurate than that just isn't worth the effort. And you might be wondering, well, are we going to take out this masonry material? And the answer is no. You'll notice there's some more right here, and behind this van that you can't see, there's actually some more right there as well. And you don't want to take that out. Reason being is it takes about the same amount of time to mask this as it would be just to spray it. If anything, it takes a little bit more time, but we're not going to get too technical and try to, account for that. Now, this is a special scenario. There is an eave right here, and you are still going to need to mask this off. Now, sometimes if the entire house is brick, like this house, you actually don't need to count that brick as siding because we're not going to be, we're not going to paint it. But you'll see here, this is where the siding does start. So you would need to account for this amount of siding. So if we paste this out from here to here and it was 20, this first story part would be 200, and then we pace this out from here to here is 10, another story. We'd have 300 total for this area right here. Now the other example is right here. Okay, so this is kind of a small picture, but it's when the entire story of a home may be brick, and you'll really notice it on the sides and stuff. But it is common where sometimes the entire first story is all brick and the entire second story is siding. When the entire story is all brick, you can actually take it out. So in this case, let's say we're only measuring or estimating to right here. We'll cut it off here. Say it's 40 foot long. You would put 400 for the second story, and you wouldn't have to put another 400. So you'll notice with this house that there is a third accent color in the peaks here. Sometimes they'll call them gables, and that's pretty common when you have a belly board of trim that's separating, two pieces of siding, especially on this house, because you'll notice the lap siding here is different from the type of siding that's up here. And on homes that are designed this way, you will see that a lot. And we do want to take that into account when we're bidding. Now, if you remember from how we got the surface area here, you know that we don't add anything extra for the peaks, like in this house. And we also don't subtract windows. The way you would bid this house is you'd figure out, the length from this corner to this corner is 45 foot long. So when we're figuring out what is the surface area of the first story, that's going to be 450. Then you measure from this corner to this corner, and that comes out to 25 foot long. So then for this part, we're going to say it is 250. Now, if this peak here was the same color as down here, you'd be done measuring the siding and you can move on to the next one. But because it is an accent color and the painters will need to come back with new paint, have an extra step here versus just spraying it all at once, we do want to incorporate that into our bidding. So what we do is for accent colors, especially in the pinks, is you're going to come down here and you're just going to put another siding spray. So siding spray here, and then you're going to put in the actual square footage of this peak back here as well as this peak here. Now, when you're doing accent colors, you can actually figure out the base times height divided by 2. And if you don't do that, it's no big deal, but just because really what we're trying to account for is a little bit more spraying. But a big thing that this estimate sheet's going to do is it's going to add another gallon of paint to account for that. And that's what we're really trying to do, is we are going to need to not only take more time to do it, because we're actually going to technically double count this area, but also that we need to account for it in more paint. So if we figured out that, this was 5 foot, so this is actually now 20 foot, times 10 is 200, and we actually have 2 peaks. If we divided that by 2, because it is a triangle, you'd have 100 and 100, so we'd put 200 down here under siding spray, and that would be how you account for additional accent color. And you'll notice it changes, it adds in another gallon there. Now, something that you may see that gets a little confusing is sometimes we're going to imagine that the whole second story here is a totally different color than the body, and it's separated by this belly board here. Homes are normally 1 to 4 colors, and even if it's one color, we'll usually say the body and the trim is the same color. A lot of homes are just 2 colors, just body and trim. And then there's homes with 3 colors like this one, where we got the body, we got the trim, and then we got these blue accent shutters. And every once in a while there is a home that's 4 colors, and basically we say body color 1, body color 2, trim, and then accent. Accent is always going to be the smallest amount on the house in terms of area. That's why they call it an accent, because it's just little areas that kind of accent it. So in this case, for this circumstance, I have to double count it. Let's just cut this off and say that we're measuring from here to here, and it's, let's say, 40, and then we got 400, 400. You would have to go back, since this is another color, put another 400 since it's accent. So you'd have a total of 1200 for this side. So we're going to move on to the eaves. Now the eaves, also known as soffits, depending if you're a roofer or painter, and it doesn't really matter, but the soffit, the eave, is the part that's, I think of it as a ceiling. It's the only part of the house that faces the ground. This is the eave, the part that actually overhangs. And you'll notice that we have 3 different options for eaves. we've got eaves body color, we've got eaves trim color, and we've got eaves a totally separate or third color. So in this picture, it's a little bit hard to see because of the shadow, but the eaves are the same color as the body. So when they spray the body, they're going to spray the eaves along with it, which makes labor a lot less. But there are some other homes, like this one for example, where the actual eaves are trim color, and that takes a lot more time. So if we were estimating this house, we're actually going to switch this drop down to eaves trim color, which is going to increase the amount of units that it's going to take to paint the house. Now there's something important also to note here. When you're figuring out the eaves, you're going to put underneath here, as long as that it's body color, I can't see from this picture, but you're going to put eaves body color. However, when the eaves here are going to be body color, you're going to treat them differently. When you're putting it in on your measurement sheet, it's actually going to be eaves separate color. And the reason for that is the brick is one color, the eaves, which is body color, which is this color, is another color, and then the actual fascia is the trim color. So the two colors that are touching the eaves are different, and that's when you do separate. Now let's say that the eaves on this house are this green trim color. In that case, you could make it eaves trim color, because really what's going to happen anytime you have eaves next to brick or something that you're not painting, you cannot put eaves body color. The eaves body color standard is there for when we're going to spray the body and the eaves at the same time. Now obviously if you have brick or something like that, we're not going to spray the brick period, so you'd never be able to spray the body of the house and the eaves at the same time. And in this case, if they are a separate color from the actual trim as well as the brick, that's when you put separate color. And there are a couple homes where the eave is its own third color, the body isn't brick, it's actually going to be painted, like in this case, light green on the body, dark green on the trim, and then let's just say that the eaves are orange, you would also put separate color. So be wary of that. Anytime you have brick, vinyl, stone, something that's not going to get painted for the siding or for the body of the home, the eaves always have to be either trim color or their own separate color when you're bidding. Now, 90% of the homes that we estimate are not higher than 2 stories, but some of them have a dropout basement in the back or just are 3 stories. If they are 3 stories, you're going to separate the third story trim from everything else. And you'll notice there is no third story option here, but if we go down to all applications, we have these 4 empty spots at the bottom for things that are unusual or different than what we have up here is common. So you'll click on there and you'll notice one of the options is third story eaves, body color, trim color, separate color. So you would say, hey, let's say that this was third story, you'd put the linear footage of that there, and then you'd put the second and first story linear footage here. So you want to separate those out. We don't separate the first and the second, it's all going to be considered the same body color. Now, eaves and fascia can be tricky for people just learning how to estimate how to get the actual linear footage, and that's a big reason why before we start estimating, we figure out how long the stories are, because it's going to help get a baseline to figure out what the actual linear footage is. So we get the linear footage here, which helps us figure out the length of the eave. So because we paste out from here over to here, we know that's 35 foot. If we bring that up to the top where the eave is, we know, hey, from this corner over to this corner is 35 foot long. And we're looking, does the eave ever stop, or is it continuous all the way through? It's all the way through. And is there anything that overlaps? Now there is a little bit of overlap from this eave right here. So we need to account for that. And you could even go as far to say there is some overlap right here, where this part goes in a little bit and this overlaps it. So we know, hey, from here to here is 35, and then we just need to add in the parts that overlap. So you could pace from here to here, and you could even do a little bit more of a pace there. Again, we're not trying to be super accurate, so I know, hey, this is one pace because I know, you know, this was 10 paces, this was 11 paces. Here's one pace, so there's an extra 5 foot of eave there. So we're going to say 35 plus 5 is going to be 40. Now we also need to figure out what the second story linear footage was. Now we know from corner to corner is 30 foot long. But what makes this complicated is this is at a slant. So this is what we're really trying to figure out, is what is the length from up and down. We're going to come back to this piece here, and because of the angle we're looking at this photo, you can't see it, but if you were to get a straight on view at the front, you'll notice that this and this is actually lined up, and this just kind of shoots off of it. So we don't need to figure out the length of this and then the length of this. We know it's just the hole here. So this line we know is 35 foot long. And if you actually look, if you bring this down and you bring this down, you'll see it overlaps. And so it's actually longer than 35 foot long, because if we put them together, there's extra there. So to keep things simple and for that sake of time versus accuracy, we make a simple adjustment when there's peaks. We either add 5 foot or 10 foot. And it is a little bit, an opinion, and there's a little bit of room for gray area, but we basically say, hey, if it's a small peak, which would be like this guy, where it's only going about half the house, it's a pretty small peak, we're going to add 5. And if it's a big peak, like this guy, where it goes the entire span of the house, we're going to add 10. Now, some other things that'll come into play is if it's a steep peak or not. The steeper the peak, the longer, like this may only be 10 foot, but just from here to here is 10 foot. When you lay that down, you realize it's actually 20. So even if it's a small peak, but it's very steep, I would recommend adding 10 instead of 5. But that's all we do. And it's not perfect. It's not going to say that, hey, it's actually that long, but it's enough of an adjustment to make things line up and make production go smooth and make us not have to spend a ton of time out there figuring out the exact amounts. So we know that this length from this corner to this corner is 35. Now we're accounting for all of this fascia and all of this fascia, this part right here, as well as this part right here. It's one continuous line, okay? And it's just one peak. Like if this disappeared and this was all flush and just, it wasn't a little bump out here, it would just be one peak like that, and we could add 10. So there is 30 plus 10 is now we're at 40. And when you're looking at it straight on, not at the angle with this picture, we just have this little protrusion here. So really we just need to measure out this protrusion. What I usually do is I'll start right here on the ground and I will pace to right here to figure out. It's like, okay, 1, 2, I got 2. 2 times 3 is 6 foot. And it is a little bit of at a slant, so I could make it, a little bit of adjustment. But for this practice, I'm only going to put an extra 5. So we know, hey, from this corner to this corner, this line right here, that's 30. I'm going to add 10 for the peak. Now we're at 40, and I'm going to add an extra 5 for this right here. So now we're at 45. I need to add that to what we got at the bottom. The bottom was 35 foot long, plus an extra 5 there, so we're at 40 plus 45 is 85 foot long for the eaves. And that is one of the hardest things to estimate out of estimating a house. So if that was a little bit tough, rewind, go back, listen to it again, and if you can understand that and get that in your head, you'll be able to estimate most homes, because that is, in my opinion, the hardest thing to conceptualize and understand. But again, that's why we use these numbers here. It helps you know, hey, 35 foot, look for anything that overlaps, okay? Then we got 30 foot up here, and then look for anything that overlaps. What overlaps? This piece right here overlaps. This piece right here is overlapping. And then, so we know this is 35 foot long. We need to add in this that overlaps, and since it is a peak, we need to either add 5 or 10, and we've accounted for everything. So we got 85 for the bodies. For the eave or soffit. Now what's nice is 9 times out of 10, the fascia is the part that faces you. Faces ya, fascia, and it's the part that's right next to the eave. So in this house, it's that light blue color, and the eave is the ceiling. So 9 times out of 10, the fascia and the eave are the exact same amount. Now I do say 9 times out of 10 because there are a couple areas. Like, let me show you a couple examples. In this house, you'll see here is the eave, the overhang part, the ceiling. Okay, but you'll notice on this side there is no eave. It's just fascia and there is no overhang. So this would be an example where the eave and the fascia are not the same, because there is fascia but there is no eave. The fascia faces you, that's that black part. The white is the eave. And then you'll also have the opposite on some houses, like this example here, where there actually is an eave here, and it's usually always like this, where there's a bump out to the second story, but there's no fascia that runs along here. This is just body color here. There is no fascia. So this is where, again, where this is the eave and the white part's the fascia, but they're not going to be equal because you do have a little bit of eave right here without fascia. But 90% of the time, the eave and the fascia are going to be the exact same. And that's all you really need to look for is, hey, is there anywhere, now that I know the length of the eaves, where there is not fascia? And there isn't on this house, so we know that the fascia is 85. If it's a 2-story home, we use a standard, but if it is a 1-story home, you can change it to that. You can see it makes it 2.12 hours versus 2.4 hours. Just like I mentioned with the eaves, if the house happens to be 3 stories, we want to figure out the first and second story linear footage of fascia is, and we put that number right here. Now, if there was on this house another story, we want to separate that third story. You come down to this all applications, the fascia and the eaves is towards the bottom. You're going to go third story fascia, and you're going to want to separate that. And the reason we separate it is it takes a lot more time, and we need to account for that. Okay, so the next item is windows. There is a lot of different kinds of windows. So it defaults to windows vinyl with trim because over half the homes you estimate are going to be that way, and that's the most common. And in reality, that fits really well in this box. I guess the best description would be it's a window where the glass is being held by something that you don't paint, but there is still trim around that. So it doesn't have to be vinyl. It could be metal, it could be fiberglass, it could be whatever it needs to be. But what it's saying is, in this case, it's a vinyl window, and this white vinyl, we're not painting that. But we do need to paint the trim around the window. So sometimes you'll see a home where there is a vinyl window, but there is no trim around the window. It's just encased in body. And in that case, we'd want to switch this standard to window vinyl with no trim. And we still need to take in the time to mask this off. And that's basically all we're taking in time to, because you're going to mask this, it's going to get sprayed, and then when you take the masking down, that window is finished. Versus the window here, when you take that masking down, you still got to go back and trim the trim around the window. So it's a different amount of time for each one, but that's what a window vinyl with no trim and window vinyl with trim are. And again, it doesn't have to be vinyl, it could be fiberglass, it could be metal, it could be something else, but that's what the purpose of that is. Now, another option is a wood window, and there's a couple different wood windows that we take into account. There is ones that do open and ones that do not open. So here's a house that has wood windows, and it's hard to tell sometimes, hey, does this window open or does it not? So if we look, this is a sliding window where these panes slide back and forth to a bedroom. All windows in bedrooms, because of fire, have to open by code. Now this window is, you can see that this is their living room, and there isn't actually a room up here. It's all just one big room with a high ceiling, and these windows up here are for light, but you can never reach them from standing on the ground, and they don't actually open. So all of these are here, but they don't open, and those are the two different kinds of wood windows that we put in our measuring sheet. The reason being is a wood window that opens, it takes longer to paint that than a wood window that doesn't open, and we account for that. So you might be wondering, well, how, there's only one slot for windows here. How am I going to put in the different kinds of windows? So if we were actually estimating this house, you would say, wood window that open, you could put that here, and then you're going to come down to one of those all application down here, and you're going to find wood window that does not open, that don't open, and you're going to put the amount of wood windows that open versus the wood windows that don't open. This is the back of the house, so it would actually go on the back side here. But let's take a look and see. Now, you might not always know if the window opens or closes, and that's fine. Just ask the customer. So you'll notice there's some other options. There's these 3D options, and we have the vinyl, the wood that don't open, the wood that do open. And what 3D means, so you can see in this picture that the side of the trim, 9 times out of the 10, because you spray the body and you brush and roll the trim, we're just going to face the trim. So you're only painting this side. But sometimes you'll find it on older homes that it actually is 3D to where that little piece of trim on the side is painted on the window. If that's the case, you would select wood window or vinyl window that's 3D. And that's something that you definitely want to go over with the homeowner. If you notice that it is currently 3D'd, you can explain to him, hey, if you'd like to save some money, we can change your color scheme and not paint this side here trim color. We can paint a body color, and that'll save you X amount of dollars. And if you're wondering how much that saves you, you just toggle this back and forth, the Windows option from 3D to not 3D, and it'll spit out a different price. Alright, so that covers the 3D. Now, the two-tone windows are wood windows where, you know, if we're looking at this window, what actually holds the glass is one color, and the outer trim is a different color. So let me give you an example of what that looks like. So here's a two-tone wood window where the red is one color, and then this beige is another color. That's what the two-tone means. Wood windows with no trim body color, you do want to separate that out. That's different than a vinyl window with no trim, just because sometimes this wood window is all one color. It's all body. I can show you an example of what that looks like. These are wood windows where they're all the same color, but you can see this wood window is the same color as the body. So looking at the front, we are going to count the windows. We're going to call this windows vinyl with trim. We have 1, 2, 3. So we're going to put a 3 there. So you notice we counted 3 windows, 1, 2, 3. But you could say, hey Shane, it looks like there's 2 windows here. And you are correct in that sense. And let me show you a couple examples. So here is 2 bay windows. There's another window on the right here and one on the left here that you can't see in the picture. But the difference between these bay windows is in this bay window, the 3 windows are connected by trim. There's no separation here, separated by body. However, here you can see there is some body and there's even more trim that separates it. And if you look at like the windows here as well, there's 3 there and they're connected by one piece of trim rather than having body separating them. And we're going to count these windows differently. So the rule is if you have windows that are connected with trim, you're going to total the windows and you're going to divide it by 2. Now for this bay window, since the windows are not connected with trim, you would count this as 1, 2, 3. The reason for that is you have 4 sides to paint, 4 sides to paint, 4 sides to paint. Versus here, the middle window, there's 4 sides to paint, but the 2 windows on the edges, now you only have 3 sides to paint to complete the window. So for this house, there's actually 3 windows here and here. You just can't see the extra one. It's blocked by this part of the house. So it's 1, 2, 3 divided by 2 is 1.5. 1.5, now we're at 3, plus 1.5 for this bay window, which gives you 4.5. There's another window here. It'd actually be 5.5 windows. That's how we're going to count this right here. Now for these windows, we would go 1, 2, 3. Now you may be thinking, okay, it actually looks like there's 2 windows here, and that this is separated by trim. And if you did it that way, you'd actually go 1, 2 divided by 2 equals 1. So either way, you're going to get the same number, but it does get a little bit complicated. Okay, and then one last example, you know, in this case, you can see here, you would actually count this as 1 window because 1, 2 divided by 2 equals 1. So it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 windows on the back side of this house. Now, something you'll notice is this is a sliding glass door, and really it's very similar to this window here. It's just a little bit longer. Now, sliding doors, we actually count those as windows instead of doors. What we count as doors is a swinging door that's on a hinge. It's very different to paint and takes a different amount of time. But whether this is a wooden framed sliding door or in this case a vinyl sliding door, it's pretty much the process is the same as painting a window. It's just a bit larger window. So for sliding doors, we count them as windows. And for swinging doors that are on a hinge, like 95% of front doors, we count as actual doors, or if there's a side door there. This door here, it's hidden behind a storm door, but if you actually zoom in, you can see the doorknob. And this is a door that's on a hinge. You would count that under doors on your estimate sheet, but you would count, if we were counting the back windows here, you would count this as a window. So it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 windows on the back side of this house. The last example I'll show you with windows is you're going to follow that rule of adding them up and dividing by 2, no matter how big it gets. So if we were painting the back side of this house and we're just doing the trim, you'll see that there's a lot of windows and they're connected by a lot of trim. Now, you could say, well, how do I count this? Is this just one big window, or is this 3 separate windows? And it does get a little bit hairy. The way you'll do it is if it's a sliding pane and this pane slides over the bottom pane here, so this one slides on top of that, you're going to count it as one window. If it's not sliding, like in this case, you're going to count each individual window. So in this case, we'll go 1, 2, 3, and there's another 3 here to 6, another 3 here, which is 9, 12, 15, 18, and unfortunately we can't tell if this continues, but what we can see in this picture is there's 18 windows and they're all connected by trim. So we're going to take 18 divided by 2. You would actually count this as 9 windows, even though there's more, because we're following that rule that, if it's connected by trim, add up the total amount of windows and divide it by 2. Sometimes there's a vent, such as this picture, where you have some vents and they are encased in trim. In that case, we are going to count those as windows. You'll notice this window, the white trim around it, and this vent is very similar. So you're going to count those as windows. And it also brings up another good point. Sometimes, to add a little bit of character to the house, you can recommend, if the vent is paintable, hey, what if we were to make that the accent color? As you can see, it was done here. And there's a few different ways that you can bid that out. Since we're covering windows, I'll show you one way to do it that is makes a lot of sense. Is you could think of this as a two-toned wood window, and it does not open. So you could come into your measurement sheet, since you already have different kinds of windows you're measuring, come down to the bottom and switch it to a two-toned window that does not open, and put 1, because there's 1 there. In this case there might be 2 if you're counting these. And that is how you can show them the difference in price, whether or not you accent this. You would put windows two-tone that don't open, put a 1 here, and you'll see you'll have a certain price. And then if you were to switch that to a vinyl window with trim, that would be the difference in price. Window vinyl with trim, you can see it drops the price, and that's how you could show them, the price difference if they want or decide to accent their vents. Okay, moving on, let's go on to the next category moving down this list, which is downspouts, post with 3 to 4 sides. There is no drop down to pick up different ones, and there's a lot of different weird things that'll actually fit in this category. And really what you want to think of, if you're painting trim, like the trim right here, it's one flat surface that we're painting, and we're not painting the back side or the other 2 sides. We are going to be painting the left side, but that other trim is going to be counted on the left side of the house. When you want to consider, should I put it in as other trim, or should I put it in as downspout / post with 3 to 4 sides? Let me show you another example of a home where the trim up here, we actually, since it's like a post, we need to paint the front side, we need to paint the back side, and we need to paint the top and bottom. So this trim up here, I would count as downspouts / post with 3 to 4 sides. This guy this guy, and this guy, I would figure out the linear footage of that, and I would put it in as downspout slash post with 3 to 4 sides. But like this here would actually go into other trim. So these are posts. Again, there's 3 to 4 sides you have to paint. That's where that's gonna go. And any downspout, so let's go back to the house that we're actually estimating. So when you look at this house, a downspout, see this piece of gutter that comes off the fascia and goes down to the ground here? That's what a downspout is. And on the front side of this house, you might be tempted to think, well, here's a downspout I see, put it on there. But really, this is actually going to count for the right side of the house. And the rule of thumb that we use is, let's see what the right side of this house looks like. So we're at the back here. Let's zoom into the front. If it's on that actual side of the house, that's when we count it. If it's not on the front, we don't count it. And the biggest reason we do that is to make sure we don't double count. Because if you walk around this house going, the left and then back around to the side, by the time you get to the other side, you might be wondering, did I actually count that? And you have to double check and do some math and make sure you didn't double count it. If you always do it this way, you'll know for sure I did or did not count that. And it's just the best rule of thumb, and it's technically correct. So on the front of this house, in terms of actual downspouts that are built for rain drainage, there is none on the actual front of the house. There is, however, this pillar here. Now, even though it's not the color of the trim, we're still going to count it as a pillar or a post or a downspout. So it doesn't matter what color it actually is. Reason being is it's separated from the rest of the house and we have to paint it. Now, if this pillar was just on the house as decorative trim or it's a downspout, it gets a little bit tricky. If this pillar is also the same color as the body, so based on what I just said, you might be tempted to count this as a downspout. When it's actually connected to the body, you don't have to count it as a downspout. And the reason being is when they spray this house, they're just going to continue to spray over this downspout, and it's not going to add any more time. If it adds any time at all, it's extremely minuscule and we don't have to account for it. As opposed to on the front here, when they spray behind here and they spray all this stuff, they would have to come in and spray each side of this, and they're going to end up doing it by hand most of the time. So if a pillar is not connected to the house, it does not matter what color it is, you have to include it. However, if there is a pillar or a downspout that is connected to the house in body color, you do not need to count it. You can leave it as 0. You don't need to account for this. So let's go back to the front of the house. We have, again, every story is 10 foot. So for right here, we actually have 10 feet of a downspout or a post with 3 to 4 sides. So we're going to put 10. This standard is used with those awkward things that don't make sense, but think about it. If you have to paint 3 sides, so if it's like a playground or a pergola and it's made of a bunch of pillars nailed together to create a structure, you're going to measure each one and you're going to put it under downspouts slash posts with 3 to 4 sides. All right, moving on. I'm actually going to skip other trim for right now because I feel once we get through these others, it'll make more sense to you exactly what it is. So we got a couple options for doors here because usually a lot of houses will have 2 different kinds of doors, meaning the color scheme is a little bit different. And then after that, we have a couple different garages. Now, the only time you'll see, 2 different is when they have a 3-car garage and they have a 2-door garage door like this one here, and then they have another single on the side there. So that's why there's 2 slots here, but for most homes that don't have a 3-car garage, you're only going to take up one of those slots. So let's go back to the doors, and you'll see there's a lot of different options here. So there's door that's accent color with trim. And what that means is, there's 3 colors on this house. There is the white, that's the body. There is this bluish, grayish color, that's the trim. And then it's hard to see this door in this picture, but for the purpose of this exercise, we're going to say this is a deep brown or maroon color, and that is the accent color. So it's its third own separate color. And when you see door accent color with trim, what that means is that the actual door, the part that swings open and closed, that is accent color. And when it says with trim, it means that it has the trim color around it. Now there's going to be other doors that they're all just body color. So the door that's on the hinge, the trim around it, is the same color as the body, and if that's the case, you would just pick that option. You'd find it. Okay, door body color. This one says with trim, so that's not right. Door body color with no trim. That's how you would input that door. Now let's say that there's 3 doors, you have 2 slots for doors. You would just come down to another open spot and find the appropriate whatever kind of door it is and put that in there. So most front doors are going to be door accent color with trim, like the door here. Sometimes you'll see if the door was actually trim color and it still has trim around it, you would change it to door trim color with trim. The last thing I'll talk about is we do not do any semi-transparent stain, and we do not stain front doors. So if a door is stained, you need to tell the customer or client that we don't actually work on that. All we do is painting. We don't do any semi-transparent stain. However, we can paint the door, or we can put a solid color stain on the door. If that's the case, you would choose the option here to say door stained to paint with no trim. So we're taking a stained door and we're going to change it to painted and there is no trim, or the door is stained to painted and it has trim around it. Those are the 2 options for you there. So in this case, we're going to put that there is 1 door. So on the front of this house, there's only 1 door, and it's its own 3rd color, and there is trim around it, so it's a door accent color with trim. So now when we get to the garage door, you'll see this is a 2-car garage, and it's the same color as the body. So there are a couple options here. Basically, the garage, if it were to be trim color or accent color, it's the same. So you would switch it to double car garage, trim or accent color. And then the last option is some garage doors have this decorative windows here, and we need to account for that. So we don't actually count these windows when we're counting up the rest of the windows, and they are very, very, very rarely ever like actually trimmed out. But we do need to put in a little bit more time to mask those off. So we do have the option here. This is a double car garage. It's body color with windows. So every option also has the option with windows. You know, there's single car garage, regular and with windows, and then there's also single car garage that's trim or accent color regular, and single car garage trim or accent with windows. But this is a 2-car garage and it has windows. So we're going to change that to double garage, body color with windows, and there's only 1 door. Now, when we pick the door and we pick the garage door, you'll notice the door, it's very specific of whether or not it has trim. And the reason for that is when we're accounting for doors, we're accounting for the trim around the door. Same thing with the garage door, we're accounting for this trim around the garage door. When we count the windows, you notice it's very specific on if it's 3D trim, if it's regular trim, 2-tone trim. We're worried about the amount of trim because we're incorporating, when we measure this, painting the trim around the windows. You'll also notice on the fascia that is, more trim on the house that faces you, that's along that roof line there. So we pretty much, we've accounted for the trim along the fascia, we've accounted for the window trim, we've accounted for the trim around the garage door and the front door, accounted for pretty much all the trim. We got the downspouts or the pillars. So this category up here, other trim, is anything that we haven't already accounted for. And in my head, I always think of it as vertical and horizontal. Most homes are going to have some kind of vertical trim, and some homes, not all, but some will have horizontal. And it's basically trim that hasn't counted, and they're usually on the corners. I call them corner boards. But so we've got, this hasn't been accounted for because it's not a part of a window, the fascia, or a door. So we've got, every story is 10 foot. So there's a bunch of corner boards, vertical ones. And then sometimes if a house has horizontal, it's usually kind of like a baseboard like you see on the interior of homes. Or there's one that runs along the middle. Here there's a roof line along the middle, but perhaps on a side, this house doesn't have it. But sometimes they'll have what I call a belly board that runs along the middle and is trim color. Those are usually the 2 different ways I think of other trim. So back to the front of this house, since every story is 10 foot, we're going to say 10, 20, 30, and that's all the other trim upstairs. And then going down to the downstairs, 40, 50, and I can't actually see, is there other trim there? Maybe we can get it in this picture. Now there is another piece of other trim, and it is connected to this trim around the door. So is it correct to count it or not to count it? The answer is both answers are actually correct. It kind of depends on what you think is right. From a painter's perspective, is it really going to add much time? It's not going to add that much time. Is it going to be the same amount of time as if that trim wasn't there? No, it'll be a little bit more. So both answers are correct. So in this case, I might just put 5 to split the difference. But if you put 0 or you put 10, either answer is actually correct. And at the end of the day, when you're looking at the estimate as a whole, you're still within that plus or minus 5%, and it's really not that big of a deal. It's not going to change the price very much. So we're just going to call that 5 just to split the difference to be fair. So we got 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 5. So I'm going to put 55 right here. Now we've got all our doors in there. The next thing we're going to look at is a side light. Now what a side light is some front doors have a side light to them. So when you see a door like this, there's one side light, and this is the side light. It's basically anywhere from a quarter to a half a door, but that part doesn't swing open, but it's still got that panel in there. And some have 2 side lights, one on each side, like this door here. And some, like in this case, this front door does not have a side light, but this one has 2 side lights. So you'd actually count this as 1, 2. And side lights are the same as the doors in terms of the coloration. They either are accent color with trim, trim color with trim, body color with trim, or all of those without trim. And you're just going to put the appropriate thing. For this particular house, there is no side light, so you don't need to put any, you just leave that blank. Now railings, sometimes on the front porch there's railings, or the back porch there's railings. Now from this picture, you actually can't see it, but I suspect and can kind of see it. There are some railings here. So in this picture, you can see that there actually is some railings there. Now, to be precise, these railings are on the left side of the house, and putting them under the left side here is technically correct. So in this case, we are going to put this on the left side, but just so that I don't forget and I remind myself, I'll go ahead and throw it in now since I know it's there and I can see it from the front. And when I get to the left side, I should make sure I see that. But that's all the railings that are on this house. All right, so back to the front picture. We have shutters, and there's 2 different kinds of shutters. So shutters that are reachable from the roof or the ground, and shutters that are only reachable by ladder. And really, the reason why there's 2 different standards here is you're thinking, okay, if the painter needs to remove the shutter, when he goes to do that, is he going to be able to get all the nails or screws out standing on his feet? Or is he going to have to be on a ladder? If he's going to be on his feet, you're going to put the shutters here. So this roof, if it's really steep, he's going to have to do it from a ladder. But this roof is not too steep, and a painter would be able to stand on that roof. And let's say that there are some shutters right here on each side of this window. He'd be able to stand here, and let's say that there's 6 screws, one on each of these blue dots. He'd be able to unscrew every single one without having the need of a ladder. Now let's say that he's on the back side of the home, and that this top window here has shutters on each side. In order to unscrew the screws on that shutter, he's going to have to put a ladder here that comes up to the top of this window, and he will be taking that shutter down while standing on a ladder and not standing on his feet. So really, you could think of this as shutters removable while standing on your feet, shutters removable only by standing on a ladder. And that's what we're separating here. And when you count shutters, each shutter counts as 1. So shutters 90% of the time come in pairs. There's usually a shutter on each side, so you'd actually count 1, 2, and there are actually some circumstances like this window, perhaps, if it did have shutters, since there's no space on this side, there might just be 1 there. So you'd count that as 1, 2, 3 total shutters. And then now we're back down to our options for other miscellaneous stuff. And we'll get down to this last line item that actually gets used quite often. And basically there's a bunch of different things you can put in here. So miscellaneous, unusual / ask manager, that's when you run across something that doesn't fit any of our standards. It's not a downspout, it's not a door, it's not a shutter, it's not any railings, it's some weird thing. Let's say that it's like some lattice work, or let's say that they wanted us to remove something from their house, like a banner that was placed up there, and there's no standard for that. So that's when you would just ask, a manager, a supervisor, somebody who has good experience with estimating, and they're just going to give you basically a guess of how long they think a novice painter that doesn't do it for a living, how long it would take them to remove that. And if it would take 1 hour, we're going to put 1. The other thing that this line is made for is hazards. And when you're looking for hazards, there's three things that you want to look for. One is plants up against the house. So a big bush or a big tree. So for instance, on this house, there's this large, skinny tree that's up against the corner of this house. Now, when we go to paint, it's going to be difficult to get our paintbrushes and spray behind this tree, and we're going to have to pull the tree off of the house. That's what you want to look for hazards, and it's really difficult because trees, bushes, no two are the exact same. So some general rules of thumb are for every, half to 1 story where a bush or tree that's only, a couple feet or 5 feet across is going to be an hour. So for this tree, you're looking for how wide is it. So if it's a bush that stretches along the entire side of a house, every 5 linear foot is going to be 1. So if it was 10 foot of bushes and say they're only like 4 foot high, for each 5 foot you'd say 1 and then 2, and you'd put 2 units here. So this is actually pretty skinny, and it's not 5 foot long, but it is tall. And every story we're going to count as 1. So even if it's only 3 foot tall, count it. But if it's 10 foot tall, it's still going to be counted as 1. But obviously this goes up into the second story. So we're going to put a 2 for hazards here, basically saying this is probably going to cost at least an extra 2 hours of manipulating this tree so that we can get paint behind there and make sure that it sticks, because we have to pull the tree off of the house, we have to paint it, and we have to make sure we keep the tree off a little bit in time for it to dry. So this is something else you can also talk with the customer about and let them know, hey, this bush or tree is going to be a little bit of difficult. It's going to be something that we're going to have to deal with, and give them the option. If it's something where they could trim it back with some pruners and get a couple feet off of the house, and that's not a big deal for them, then definitely make them aware of that, and then just write that on the contract. Like, homeowner is going to trim up landscaping around the front porch so that we have 2 foot out of the railings, because a lot of times that front deck that has railings is going to have bushes where the bushes are growing into the railings. But if they prune those back and trim them back to where we can get in there and have that 2 feet to get a body in there and can paint it, then it's not an issue, and the customer might want to be able to save some money. Here's a couple other examples. So this is what I'm talking about. There's actually no railings here, but a lot of times there is like some railings, and there's a bush. This is an extreme case to where this is obviously going to impede on us painting and be something that we're going to have to deal with. There's a bunch of different ways, and it really just depends on the situation of how the painters will deal with it, but you need to account for this. So this is obviously more than 5 foot, so I would say this is 10 foot, and it actually does go up into the second story. So I would say 1, 2, and depending on if it's 5 foot above the second story in terms of width, 3 or 4. So I'd at least put 3 for this situation. But if you explain to the homeowner, hey, this is going to be an issue with us painting, and they're willing to, remove this or trim it back so that it's not an issue, I usually tell them we need about 2 foot off of the painting surface. So if that's possible and they can do that, great. But I always write it on the contract, because a lot of times, you can see this estimate was done when there was snow on the ground. Then by the time we get out there, little things that were said, they may have gotten a couple estimates and they forget like who said what, and it just slips out of their mind. But if it's on the contract, like, hey, it was said, we did talk about it, and if they're unable to do it because they run out of time or something, then no problem, we'll just add that price back in. Here's another example of something you might want to make a hazard/obstacle for, is sometimes sheds are really close to the fence or the house, and the client does want you to paint the side that is that close, but there's not enough room to get a human body back in there, so you'd have to get it with like rollers and an extension pole, and it just can create a lot of extra time to paint a small surface area. So that would be something else where you could put a miscellaneous hazard. And again, what you're really doing is kind of guessing how much more time it'll take. If you don't have much experience knowing how much time it takes, just ask somebody who does. Some other examples that might come into play for miscellaneous/hazard is someone might have a big pond in their backyard, and for the purpose of visioning it, let's say that there was a huge pond right here on the driveway. Now, in order to get up here, you're not going to be able to put a ladder right there and get up to the second story here. So that's going to create, some problem solving, some trickiness. In some cases, you might not have the right equipment to be able to complete a job like that. And again, unless you're actually the one painting it, if you're just doing the estimating and sales, a lot of times you're not paying attention to those things. You're just thinking about, measuring the house. But keep a keen eye open for that kind of stuff. And obviously you should add in extra time for troubleshooting that problem. And in some cases you may want to even ask a manager, hey, is this gonna inhibit us from being able to actually produce this job, and make sure that you can do it. Two more things. One is the steepness of the roof. If you've got any experience with roofing, it's basically called the pitch. And if a roof is a certain steepness, it's basically like a slide. Like, you just can't stand on it. You try to stand on it, but you just slide right off. Here's an example of a home where you're going to want to add in extra, miscellaneous / hazard time for steep roof. So it's very complicated unless you've painted a lot. It's hard to say how much time it's going to increase, and in some cases, if you don't have the right equipment, you won't be able to do some homes. It is pretty rare, but usually when it's a steep roof, they try to match the pitch of the ladder so that it comes down into the ground here, and it's the same pitch as this roof, so they can get up to something high, like say they need to paint something up here. And here's one of those areas where you can't stand on this roof because it's so steep, but it's also such a long pitch that the ladder isn't really going to help. So like painting this part of the siding here is going to be tricky, and you're going to have to take extra time to get it done. Painting up here at this part, luckily this roof is slanted down here, so it creates a little pocket down there where you can do some special stuff, but again, it's going to take extra time to get this part of the siding. This shouldn't be too bad because you can lay a ladder down and be able to get up there. Same with this area here. And it is a bit tricky to try to figure out, what's going to add extra time, what's not. Here's an example of a house where, you can't put a ladder here because the steepness of this roof is too shallow, but painting this siding right here, that's going to be extremely difficult. Getting back into here, there's some siding on this side, super difficult. If you're trying to paint the back side of this chimney right here, that's going to be extremely difficult given the nature of this roof. Same thing on this side, It's possible, there's ways to do it, but again, that's when you need to add in some extra time. And if you're not the one painting and you don't have a good understanding how long that takes, just ask, someone who does, and they'll help you come up with the right amount of time that you need to put in there for the additional amount of work that creates. The last thing I want to talk about for hazards is when a house is, it's usually dropout basements, but you can see when you have this large right here, when you're not on flat ground, it's an angle, especially when this is like loose dirt, or even worse is rocks, loose rocks, because we're going to have to put a ladder here that's going to come up onto the siding, and the feet of that ladder is not going to be even, to where this one needs to be longer than this one. There's different tools you can use to make this happen, and it's definitely doable, but it does create extra time just maneuvering the ladder and making sure that it's safe. And sometimes, you'll have a second person actually stand at the base of the ladder just to make sure it's extra safe, but it's taking two people to paint this area up here, when normally on flat ground it can be one person because it's a lot easier to set and move the ladder. In this case, whenever we have this gradient and it's more than 6 foot, I always tell them to add one unit for each side, and just do your best to look out for that kind of stuff, and always be thinking of the person that actually is going to paint this house. Is there anything that's going to make this more difficult than it needs to be, rather than your typical house that's just, flat on all sides, nothing, leaning up on the house, no trees or anything. Alright, so now we have the front measured out, and I'll show you the beauty of having a spreadsheet and how quickly this goes when it does the math for you. So we'll measure the rest of the house, and then we'll get on to stuff like prep work and paints. So here's the right side, and we need to measure, if we pace out from there and we walk all the way to this corner, say that we get 13 steps. 13 times 3 is 39, so closest 5 is going to be 40. And then let's say that we measure from here to here. You can see there's like 1 or 2 step difference from this, right there. It's hard to see in the picture. Let's say that we got 12, that's going to be 36. If you multiply it by 3, closest is 35. So we know on the bottom portion here, this is 400 because we multiply it by 10 for the story. The top portion, multiply it by another 10, is going to be 350. 400 plus 350 is 750, and that's what we're going to put for the surface area for siding spray. Now the eaves, again, their body color, and on this side we can see, that the eave, you know, there's one eave. It starts from this corner and it actually goes all the way over to this corner. When it ends here up on the second story, it picks up right there and goes to there. It's a little bit of a slant, but we don't need to add anything for that small slant. But we know we already got the distance from this corner all the way over to this corner was 40. So we know the length is 40 for the eaves. And there is no like first story eaves here, or I guess there is a little bit here and there, but it's simply just 40. Same for the fascia is going to be 40. Windows, let's see, we got one window, and if you actually look, there is no trim around the window. And we've got windows vinyl with trim that is on the front. So I'm going to come down to here. I'm going to find windows vinyl with no trim. Windows vinyl with no trim. And on the right side, we do have one of those. And then I'm just going to keep on working my way down the list. Next is downspouts. Posts with 3 or 4 sides. Now there is this downspout right here. But since it's actually on the body and it is the body color, we're not going to count it because it doesn't actually take much more time to just spray this all at once. And then these, I know it's really hard to see from the picture, but they actually are trim color. So for each story, this is going to be 10 foot and this is going to be another 10 foot for a total of 20. So on the right side, there are actually 20 linear footage of downspouts. And they are, you know, if you look at the front here, it almost looks like they're on the front, but since the actual part of the downspout is facing the left side, it's actually facing on the left side, that's where I count it, is on that side. So I know I don't double count. So we got 20 for downspouts. Other trim. So normally, like on the front here, you'll see that there are corner boards, but on the back here, there are no corner boards. So we have no other, you know, trim here. But here on the side, you know, there are some corner boards, these wrap around, and you count them for each side. So this is going to be 10. If there wasn't a downspout here, there'd be another 10. When the downspout sits on the corner board, you're going to paint it all at once, so you don't need to count it as other trim, because when we account for downspout small pillars, we're accounting to trim that area out right there, and you're done. But let's say that there was a downspout in the middle and this didn't have a downspout here, you would count the other trim. So there is no other trim on this side. There's no you know, baseboard, there's no belly board that runs along the middle here. That's trim, so pretty easy. You can see for a painter, he's going to mask off that window, he's going to spray this side, take the masking off, body's done. Then all he has to do is trim the fascia, trim out these downspouts, and this side is done. It's a pretty easy side, as you can see. There is no railings, no shutters, no doors, so that's it, done with that side. Let's move on to the back. On the back here, from the front, if you remember, we know that the front was 35 foot long. There isn't a difference between the first and the second story like there is on the front, on the back, and it's 35 foot long and it's 2 stories. So 350 for the first story, 350 for the second story. You add those two together, you get 700. Then we want to know what is the eaves. We know from this corner here to this corner here is 35 foot long. We know that from right here. Since it is a peak and it goes the entire side, we're going to count that as a big peak. So I'm going to add an extra 10. So I know, right, the distance from here over to here is 35 foot long. And then we're trying to account for if you have this right here and you bring it down. So if you were to swing this down, you know, it would actually come over here. And if you did the same thing with this guy right here, if you were to swing it down, it would be something like that. And we have this overlap here. So that's why we're adding 10 for the peak. Okay, so we know it's 35 foot long, add 10 for the peak. Now we're at 45. We also need to account for this fascia here. And if we were to paste this out, let's just say we get 3 steps. 3 times 5, or I'm sorry, times 3 is 9. So we're going to add an extra 10. So for the fascia, we got 35, 10 for the peak, that's 45, plus another 10, 55. Okay, there is, you know, this little wraparound here on both sides, and we couldn't see it from the picture on the other side, but we could add a little bit more fascia on that, but it's going to be, you know, 1-2 foot, and we go in 5, so it's closer to 0. So if you put an extra 5 or you put 0, either way, you're correct with the style of estimating that we're doing, and it's such a minuscule amount, it's not going to make a huge difference. We'll still be in that plus or minus 5% by the time we get to the end. Windows, we're going to come down to this section, windows vinyl without trim. On the back side, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's a sliding glass door, so that's going to be 5. So I'm going to put a 5 down here. Now you'll notice up here that there is a vent and it is trimmed out just like a regular vinyl window. So I'm actually going to come up here and put one window for windows vinyl with trim, because again, this is just like trimming out a window. It's a small window, but they're going to spray everything. They're actually going to spray the vent part here, and then they're going to trim this out just like they would a small window here. But for this window, once they take off the masking, it's done because this is all vinyl and it's not getting painted. So next thing, downspouts, small pillars. There is no downspouts here. Now, I'll talk about the deck later, but say that we were going to be estimating this deck. Sometimes there is a support beam down here that has, it's a post, and it's got 4 sides that we're painting. And you can't tell from this picture like how high up this deck is, but if they're 5 foot, you'd go 5, 10, and you put that in there. But we're not actually doing the deck. For railings, you don't count this as a post. It's the entire railing. So you take the linear footage of the railing. So say that you paste this out and you got 7 steps. 7 times 3 is 21, so you'd say 20 linear footage of railing for this part right here. But we're not bidding that right now. I just wanted to go over railings a little bit more to help you out there. So in the back, there is no downspouts, no other trim. I don't see any other trim. There's no doors. There's nothing else really here that we're going to account for. No shutters, no railings. So we're done with the back. So onto the very last side, which is going to be the left side. Left meaning if you're staring at the front on the driveway looking forward, this is the left side. So okay, so when we paste this out from here to here, it's going to be 40. I know that from the other side. And that's what's nice about the exterior. It's normally just a square. There are some, different shaped exteriors like L's or some different things, so watch out for that. But 90% of the homes are just a box, and we know the distance from this corner to this corner is 40. Okay, so what's unique about this side is you'll notice this roof slants down, and is this 1 story or is this 2 stories? And I mean, looks like 1.5 stories to me. Realistically though, when you walk in this door, there's not going to be a 2nd story up here. So if you put 1 story from here, you're correct. So we can count this actually as 1 story for this part right here. So we know again that it's 40 for the length of from this corner to this corner. Now the 2nd story starts here and it ends right here. So when you're on the ground, you're going to pace from there to there, or you're going to use your wheel to measure or get a measuring tape out and measure that. Okay, let's just say it's 20 foot long. We got 7 paces. 7 times 3 is 21, and we'll round down to 20. So 400 for the 1st story, plus another 200 for the 2nd story is going to be 600 total. All right, now for the eaves, let's take a look and break this down. So we know, hey, there's an eave that runs from here, goes all the way over to here, and as soon as it stops right here, it picks up right here, and it continues to run all the way over to here. As soon as that stops, it picks up right here, and it runs over to there. So really, if you think about it, there's a continuous eave. I know it stops here, but it also starts up again, stops here, starts up again. So it's a straight line with no peaks that goes all the way from right here all the way through. I know my line drawing isn't straight to there. And we know that from here, walking over to here is 40 foot long. Maybe we could take off 5 foot because of this tiny little bit. So if you put 35 or 40 for that, either one's right. For simplicity, I'm just going to say that's 40 from here to here. And now we've taken care of this part. We've taken care of this part. And we've taken care of this part. So what is actually left? The parts that are left is this part right here and this part right here. So what you could do on the ground is you could just pace. Okay, that's 3 steps, and then line up with this, pace this. Okay, that's 2 steps. 3 plus 2, that's a total of 5 steps times 3 is 15. So there's an extra 15 foot of fascia. Now, since this is, slanted, if you wanted to add 5, you could to make it 20. We'll just keep it at 5, okay? Or I'm sorry, at 15. So 15 for the yellow and 40 for the red. 15 plus 40 is 65 linear foot, okay? So that's how I break up the eaves, and that's why measuring it out helps. Like, okay, I know that's 40 foot, and now I just have to measure this part and measure this part. Rather than you're pacing out and measuring all this, it just breaks it down and makes it easier. So try to find that one continuous line all the way through so you can use that measurement, and then just cross that off so that you're not doing that again. What's left over? Figure out the leftovers. Sometimes fascia can be, they're very intricate and tricky, but take your time, and I think if you use that logic, you'll always be able to get an answer. What's great is everywhere where there's an eave, I guess I was saying fascia the whole time, but everywhere where there's fascia, there is an eave. So these are going to be equal. Like I said, most homes, 95% of the time, they're always equal. We've got one window right here, and that's it. And it's a window, it's vinyl, but there's no trim around it, so we're going to put it down here. If you actually look, you can see there's 2 other windows, and there's actually, you can tell from the other picture that these windows don't actually go any further. I can see right here is where it stops. It doesn't actually go down. You can see like right there it stops. It doesn't go down. So it's really just half of a window, half of a window. So what's nice is you can say half and half. We can put one window vinyl with trim on this side right here. Okay, so now on to downspouts. No downspout here. There is a downspout here. And what's nice is this one is not body color. So you can see it is trim color, and it's actually sitting on that trim. So we're going to count this trim, but we don't need to count this trim here because the downspout's on it. So we do 10 for every story, and you can see there's actually a downspout here, a downspout here, and a downspout that comes all the way here. So it's actually 2 stories from when it, as soon as this one ends, another one picks up. As soon as that one ends, another one picks up. So it's actually a full 2 stories. So I'm going to put 20. You may be wondering, what about this? You could put an extra 5 for it if you want. Generally, I don't. I just do every story as 10. Now, if I didn't see these downspouts up here, they weren't there, I would actually put 15 for here because there is this here, and this really is taller than the normal story. So I'd say, between that and that, there's easy enough to put another 5. So I would put 15. If I was checking this estimate and you put 10 and this didn't exist up here, I wouldn't say that you were wrong, but that's just how I would estimate it. Okay, so we know the downspouts is 20. And there is other trim. We do have some other trim. So I want to make a really good point here. You'll notice on the front, we counted this as other trim right here, and right here. And you'll notice on the side, this is the same part of the trim, We do count it again because when we're counting it on the front, we're just saying facing it, just painting this part of the trim. We're not talking about painting the side of the trim right here, only the front. So it's important to know you're not double counting it, you count it each time. So we have every story is 10 foot, 10, 20, 30. We're going to put 30 for other trim here. Don't see any doors, no side lights obviously. We already counted for that 5 foot of railing. There's 5 foot of railing right here. Shutters, don't see any. So the house is now done. Now on to what is, in my opinion, the absolute hardest thing to estimate, which is prep work. So for my company, especially when we're trying to have, salespeople estimate, we target homes that are going to get their second paint job. And a big reason for that is it makes bidding prep work easier because you can see this house, there's actually not very much peeling paint. It's actually hard to find some peeling paint, maybe a little there. We got some like caulking there. I don't even see peeling there. Like really, there's not a lot of prep work here, which makes, the room for error a lot less here versus if you see, stuff like this on a home, that is really hard to determine. How long is it going to take to properly prep that? And really, it may look like this on one house and it may look the exact same on the other house, but sometimes just because of that house and the way things were, it took less time to prep it out than it did on the other house. So we don't do homes before 1978, mainly because they, and at least in Colorado, use lead-based paint, and we don't want to deal with any lead. But that also helps us to where we're not dealing with homes that have a tremendous amount of prep work. If you see, it's called alligatoring. Here's a couple examples of what it looks like. Basically, they call it alligatoring because it resembles the scales of an alligator, and chances are 9 times out of 10 that is lead-based paint. You can grab it, and if it comes off kind of like a potato chip and it's stiff and brittle and you can snap it in half, chances are it's lead-based paint. And make sure you are lead certified and doing it properly if you're going to do lead-based homes. But we've just chosen not to, and the two biggest reasons are, one, it's extremely difficult to figure out how much prep do I put in here, how long is this going to take to do it right. The other issue is, the expectation of proper prep for a homeowner may not be the same expectation for the proper prep for, the painting company. And you need to do a really good job making sure you guys have the same expectations. And often, if you meet 3 different people, they might all 3 have a different expectation of what is the proper amount of prep work. So one person might be upset, one person might be overwhelmed and thought you did way more prep work than they're expecting, and the other person might think you just did, the perfect job to where that's exactly how they would have done it. So part of what that long rant is about is, if you have a house that has a lot of prep work, where there's going to be a lot, so let me show you one that's not lead based, where there is just insane amount of prep work. Here's a house where, obviously it was peeling everywhere. This is after we scraped some of the paint off. But it's extremely difficult to figure out, if you're trying to measure square footage or linear footage, it's like, well, it's good up here, but it's not good here. And like, well, it turns into a nightmare. And before you do it, it's really hard to determine how long is this actually going to take. And the truth is, on this house, we could take couple days, we could take a couple weeks. Like, you could argue, no, this needs to be sanded more, we need to spend more time here, you need to really try to peel that up. And my point with all this is that whole expectation communication that you should have with the homeowner, and tell them, here's what we're planning to do for prep work. And what we do, and we found that works really good, is we just write down the amount of hours that we estimate for doing the prep work. So, if we have, let's say, a 2-man crew and they're working 8 hours a day, and I put 16 hours of prep work, it's like those guys are going to do prep on your house for 1 full day, and then they're going to probably be painting the next day, which puts it into perspective for the homeowner. If they're like, whoa, 2 guys are only going to spend 1 day on my house prepping, that's not even close to enough. I was thinking at least 3 or 4 days. Now hey, our expectations are not in the same. And then if they want more prep, it's fine, I can change it. Like, we'll do 100 hours of prep. We'll spend twice as much time, but here's the additional cost, and we have no problem doing that. But that way also, it makes it an easier conversation if you talk about this stuff beforehand to say, hey, I'm not sure how long this is going to take. This is what I estimated it for, and if it ends up taking longer, you'll see, we'll be out there, we'll be sweating, we'll be working our butts off trying to do this right for you. But if I misjudge it and it ends up taking an extra 20 hours, would you be okay to pay X amount an hour for that? Or how do you feel, and what's your opinion with that? If you have that conversation beforehand, it's much better than doing it after the fact. And you'll understand, maybe the homeowner's like, no, I want to pay one price. So the price you give me is the price that I'm paying, and I need to know beforehand. And if a homeowner's like that, you just make sure you do a really good job estimating, and I would give it an extra 25%. Because at the end of the day, worst case scenario, you can always do a little bit extra prep for them. If it ends up being less than that, then just spend a little bit more time sanding. I mean, you could sand way longer. Scrape some stuff and see if you can get some more paint off. All right, so that's enough about that. I think I've driven home that it's really hard to estimate prep work. So that's why we target homes like this. 90% of our homes, they're painting because the paint faded. And most of the paints these days, they say lifetime warranty for everything, no peeling, chipping, bubbling, but they don't cover fading. So a lot of the newer homes, you'll notice there's very, very little bits of peeling, maybe at the bottom where water builds up and it freezes and thaws. Here's 2 different kinds of substrate. So it's your typical siding that basically it's particle board that's glued together, and then they slap on a laminate on top that gives it that wood grain appearance, but it's fake wood grain, it's not actual wood grain. And this stuff does hold up a lot better than real wood. So this house is made up of real wood, this house is made up of that particle siding. So if you see a house that's in this kind of condition, Obviously, this is after we did some prep work, but when the majority of the house is peeling, even anything over 40%, I would say, definitely recommend a full coat of primer to the homeowner. Reason being is if you don't prime every surface, there might be a little part up here that doesn't get primed, but this all does, but it's got little microscopic openings in the paint that you can't really see with the human eye, but it needs to have primer on there. So if you see this, that's when I would say you need it. It's the difference between wanting it. Everybody wants extra protection if it's free, right? But when I say you don't want it, you need it, is when it is in this condition. And this kind of siding, this particle board, it doesn't peel like this. This is what happens. But when you see like this kind of look, and basically it's that laminate has actually broken down, and the little particles of wood that were glued together are now starting to come through that laminate. It almost looks like a fuzz, almost like a really fine carpet coming through. When you see that, that's when you say you need a full coat of primer. The reality is you don't want to just spray this with paint. You need to prime it first, and then you need to paint it. And when you prime it, it's best to back roll it or brush it in to actually work it into the substrate and make sure it seals that up. So in this case, I would not just paint this person's house. I would let them know, hey, I can't just paint it. I need to do a full coat of primer and then paint it. If somebody else is willing to, that's fine. But I've just learned from experience that if you do that, it's going to fail. And we don't want warranty work, and we don't want to, leave a house looking bad. But that's enough about that. So if you see this, you need a full coat of prime. If you see this, you need a full coat of prime. If you see this, you don't need it. I would always say, hey, if you're the person who wants extra quality and is looking for, the best paint job you can get, 2 coats of paint or a full coat of primer and a full coat of paint. If it's white like this, I would say full coat of primer and then a full coat of paint, because the primer is close to white and it has more protectant agents in it, like titanium dioxide, versus if it's a really dark green, I would say 2 coats of paint over a coat of primer and a coat of paint. Reason being is that green is going to fade. It's not going to peel and stuff, but it's going to fade. And 2 coats, 2 layers where the sun has to eat through it is going to last a little bit longer in terms of fading than just one piece. And we know the primer helps for not like peeling and stuff, but so long story short, if it's a white color or a white base or a really light color, I would recommend full coat of primer, then coat of paint. If it is a medium base or a darker color, I would say 2 coats of paint will be good for the homeowner. Here's an example where I wouldn't say you need a full coat of primer. We can spot prime this, but this is what you need to be looking for. This house from this picture looks like it doesn't need any, I can't see any peeling paint really, but pictures, you can't really tell, and this is why you have to do in-person estimates. You need to go up and actually look at the wood. Check the bottom of these siding boards on all 4 sides, and what you're looking for is this. You're looking for where the paint opened up and you've got little peeling paint. But when you're looking at this head on, like in this picture, a lot of times you can't see it. Even in person, even 4 foot away from the wall, you actually have to look up and actually look for this. When you see this, they don't need a full coat of primer. It definitely won't hurt to do a full coat of primer, but they don't need it. And basically what we're going to do is, I call it making their house look like a zebra. You're going to have a bunch of white stripes. We're really priming the underneath parts of the boards here to lock that in and seal this up. So we need to scrape sand and prime those areas, and that is going to create a lot of prep work. So look for that, and that's going to tell you, hey, I need to increase the prep work. And it's really just a matter of how much is there on the house. When it comes to estimating, it is very difficult to estimate, and the more experience the estimator has, the better they're going to be at estimating. And ideally, if it's the same person doing the estimate and actually doing the painting, they're going to obviously have the best judgment of this. Luckily for me, our estimators have been doing this for over 10 years, and they've got a good idea where they can walk around a house and they know, what's the right amount of prep for that house before. So in our estimating standards, we don't actually have this compute out how much prep it's going to take. We just have them literally put in there. This is just for taking notes, to help them remember and whatnot, because it's almost like an opinion more than a fact of how long it's going to take. But for a new estimator that doesn't have much experience, this is a little chart we used to use that kind of helps them understand how long it's going to take. So when you see siding that's peeling like this, it's just the bottom parts of the board. The rest of the board's fine. So I would say it's in that 10 to 25% peeling. And then every 200 square footage we'd put for a unit. And you can see the rest of it here. So it kind of helps, for caulking, every 50 linear footage for the first story, 30 for the second story, or if you're trying to make it easy, just for a whole 2-story home, every 40 linear footage. You can use this. A good rule of thumb, it was just painted 5 to 10 years ago, 6 to 12 units is normally fine. If it was painted 10 to 15 years ago, it generally falls between 12 and 24 units. And if it's been over 15 years since it was painted, it's 24 plus. Some homes literally will take more time and more effort and cost more to prep it than to paint it. Okay, so the other thing that we're going to be looking for is caulking. And I'll just show you, one of our jobs. Most of the jobs, especially, if it's the first paint job, is going to be needing a lot of caulking because the house is settled and a lot of the joints opened up. So you can see, we're caulking in here, caulking these seams, and really you're looking for this kind of stuff. Everywhere where the seam is, where this trim meets this siding, caulking. Same thing here. You're looking for those corners where there's like a 1x1 piece. See, there's like caulking here, caulking there. This house, I believe, had a good amount of caulking needed on it. You can see the caulking there, caulking in there, caulking in there. I think you get the idea. Lots of caulking needed. There you can see he's actually caulking right now, going through and getting all those. Now this house actually had really a lot of caulking, but all the nail heads were flush. And nail heads is a interesting thing. So you can see on this house where, these nail heads were not flush and they have a little bit of a divot in them. So we want to caulk that and seal that up. So when you're looking at caulking, you're looking for those two things. One is, are there a lot of joints that are opened up that are going to need to be resealed? For a standard paint job, you can definitely give the option where we recaulk every seam, but typical standard paint job, we're going to recaulk the seams that have opened up and failed, but the seams that are perfectly fine, we'll leave those alone. And then when it comes to nail heads, check and see if there actually are nails on the siding. Sometimes the nails are, since it's lap siding, are up underneath there and you don't really see any nail heads. And it's really up to the customer. If the customer wants every single nail head caulked, then just bid that in and do that. But if they don't, typically what we look for and what we say is, hey, if the nail is protruded out, we're going to hammer it back in and get it flush with the siding. If there's a little bit of a divot there, we are going to, you can kind of see that these nail heads were caulked the first time the house was painted, and they're flush with the siding. But these nail heads, there was a little bit of a divot, so we put just a little bit of caulking in there, smooth it out with our fingers so that when we actually paint it, there's no areas where the rain and water is going to sit inside that little divot and start to rot the board from that nail head out. That's what we're trying to prevent. And you need to see, are there a bunch of nail heads that have those there to where we're going to have to spend a lot of time going through and caulking most of the nail heads, or is there going to be just a lot of joints? Like when you look at where the siding meets the trim, there's tons of joints where it needs to be caulked. We usually do every 50 linear footage of caulking is 1 hour, and it gets difficult trying to measure out every single line where there's caulking. So over time, and especially if you are a painter and you're bidding this out, you kind of know in your head how long this job is going to take you. So if you're like, hey, I'm working alone, it's going to take me 3 days to get this fully prepped based on my experience, I would come here and I would put, if you're working 8-hour days, 8 and 8 is 16 plus another 8 is 24. I would put 24 units of prep here. Now again, this is for a novice painter. So if you think that you're twice as good as somebody off a street, maybe you want to double that to 48, because that's what these standards really are for, is for somebody who's not that experienced in painting. And if you typically paint 2 to 3 times as fast, you can add in that extra time, because that would be if you were to just, hire somebody who didn't have much experience, how long it would actually take them to get the house done. But for us, that's why it's kind of good for the estimators. If they don't really have much experience painting, I always say, hey, how much time would it take you to do that? That's how many units we're going to put here. So a lot of my estimators, at one point, I'll have them paint a house so that they get a good idea, like, okay, if I were to do that, that would take me 3 days. I'm going to put 24 in here. All right, so moving on. So those are the big two you're going to look for, is peeling paint. Normally it's going to be on the trim, especially on these new homes, and then how much caulking is there. If all the seams look really good, I can't really find anywhere where it needs caulking. There's really no peeling paint on the house. All the nail heads are flush. Like, there's almost no prep. Or let's say that this house was built a year ago, it's in immaculate condition, and they just moved in and they really dislike the colors and they want to change the colors, there's really not much prep on the house. We always do a minimum of 6. That's basically to take up the time it's going to take to power wash the house and do very like, there's always going to be a tiny little bit of caulking, tiny little bit of priming somewhere. There's always going to be some kind of prep, even if it's just covering the sidewalk here. Typically in our spraying or painting standard, we're accounting for masking things, masking roof lines, masking the concrete. So technically that's not even quote unquote prep for the way that these standards work. So 6 is just the minimum that we ever put, and it's always, when there's more prep than none, that's when we're adding on to the 6. So if I were to say this is going to take me 3 days, I would actually do 24 plus 6 and make it 30. Because there's always going to be some prep that you can't see. Like the backside up here, there's probably some prep that you just can't see from the ground. Okay. So after you walk around the house and you get all the measurements, you should have a good idea of how much prep work is on the house because you've seen the whole thing now. And you're going to put that amount right here. You can't see in pictures. This house looks, I can't see any prep work, but there might be a ton of caulking. There might be a lot of peeling up underneath these siding boards that you can't see. When I actually checked this house, there was 14 hours of prep on it, which just goes to show you can't tell from pictures. But we'll just leave it at 6 since in the picture it looks fine. And the next thing you want to do is figure out the materials. So down here in this box is going to show you the materials, and it's basically this side with this drop down. You pick the kind of paint that you want to put on the house, and then these are what we're calling it. So body, trim, accent, and this is second body color, second accent color if there is there. And if there's any stain work on the house, you'll notice there already are numbers in these 3, because these 3 already, it automatically tells you how much paint is going to be used. You might think that this is high, and it could be high. I mean, generally we use less paint than this, but it's taking into account worst case scenario, such as if the house was like a deep red or a yellow color that really has issues covering. We estimate for that so that we usually never have to buy more paint than what is put here. Obviously, there's no staining on this house, so it's putting a 0 there. Now, let's say that there is some accent in the peaks up here. You'll notice, if this was like a trim board and this right here was a trim board and they're going to accent here and here, the way you would estimate from that is come down, make a new siding spray, and then you would put in the extra amount of surface area there. And you can see it went from 14 to 15. See 14, I put that in there, so it is accounting for it. It just puts it under body. It doesn't know that it wants to be an accent color. If you were trying to be super precise for the people that are actually going to produce this, like the painters or something, and you're worried about them saying, oh, it didn't account for any accent or something like that, you could separate this and put 14 and 1 down here just so it makes more sense to them. But I'd recommend not doing that unless you need to for some reason. You can see this is a formula, so the instant you put something in here, it's going to get rid of that formula and not work anymore. But the one thing is you do have to put in if there is an accent color. So let's say that this house, there's no accent and the front door is going to go body color. You can leave it as is. But let's say that this front door is red. You want to put an extra gallon of accent in there so that it accounts for it. Or let's say that it is just how it is right now, but they're like, you know what, I want to accent just these tiny little triangles. Unfortunately, you can't buy less than a gallon of paint. You could buy a quart, but they don't make all these paints in quarts, so you always have to put at least 1 gallon. So if they wanted to do that and there was no accent, you just have to come down here and put 1 more there. So we're going to put in the paints that are in here, and it is defaulted to Bare Premium Plus because that's just the first one that's in there, and that's actually typically what we sell a lot of. But let's say that they wanted to go with any Sherwin-Williams paint, change it to Super Paint. You can show them the difference in price just by doing that, toggling back and forth. So it's $35.11 for the Super Paint, and it's $33.69 for the Bare Premium Plus. And then you can just easily show them the difference in price there. So if they want Emerald, for it, you got to make sure you change all 3 over to Emerald, and you can see now we're jumping the price up to about $4,300. This 10% off price, we're always running a promotion, and if they're able to take advantage of it, like they had a coupon from a door flyer, or we're running some promotion, hey, if you get in the spot we have open for May, you'll get the 10% off. There you go. A lot of times we do 10% off if they're willing to give us an answer right then and there while we're at the estimate. But that's why there's two different prices there, and basically this is the price, and then that's as much discount as they're going to be able to get. The best price they'll be able to get is $38.80. And then if we change it back to Bear Premium Plus, you'll see this house would be about $3,300. So down here you can actually do an option. Now you can always put, let's say that they want their deck done, you have these extra lines down here, and if there is enough room you could just put in the deck measurements here so that it all comes out to one price. But it's often nice to separate it out, especially if they want to see it that way, so you can see what the two different prices are. So that's what this is for. And these all applications, let me change these back, are just like these. They have every single standard in there. So let's say that we are doing a deck and there are some railings. You would come down and you'd find railings, and then you'd put the linear footage of railings in there, and it's going to spit out how much that would cost. So where is the deck on this guy? You can't really see it all, but we'll say it's 20. And then this deck, it might be composite, but let's pretend that it's getting painted and it was 400 square foot. You would find deck right here, deck surface area, and you'd put that there. Let's say that there's stairs leading up to the deck, like on the other side there's 3 or 4 stairs that come up there. You would put stairs. You would put, hey, there's 4 stairs. You got to make sure we got that deck surface area in there, and let's say that that was 400. And then if there was something unique, like maybe some posts, you would go to Downspouts posts with 3 or 4 sides, and then let's say we're painting these posts that support the deck, and there was 20 foot of that. You'd put that there, and then anything else that pertains to it. We do have, for some prep in there, heavy sanding surface area, light sanding surface area. These are mainly for decks, and if they want just a light scruff sanding of the whole deck surface area, you could put that and then the surface area of the deck, or the surface area that they want sanded of that deck. And then heavy sanding would mean like they really want us to spend some time sanding. Those are what those two standards are for. And then that's it for deck. Now let's talk about fences. So here's a couple different examples of a fence. This is your typical fence, and then this is like another style of fence. And there's a couple different options on the fence, but the point I'm making is this right here and this right here, we're going to use the same standards. And it's going to be called, so there's spraying, and then there's brushing and rolling. So fence side with beams, and then fence flat side. So both of these fences in this example are sides with beams. You're going to put in the linear footage for this, and you're going to say, hey, let's say that this is 50 linear foot. You would put in whether we're going to brush and roll it. So we've got brush and roll side with beams, brush and roll flat side, spray side with beams, spray flat side. So let's say we're going to spray this. We'll put spray fence with side with beams, and we'll put in 50, and that'll compute and spit out a number for us. And if you see this style of fence, you're going to put in the same thing. Now, what's unique about fences is there's 2 sides, and typically, like on this fence, you're only going to paint your side, and your neighbor's going to paint their side. Same with this guy, we're going to paint this side of the fence, and then the HOA will typically take care of the other side of the fence. It's important that it's the same color on both sides, versus here you could actually have 2 different colors on each side. If we're spraying this side of the fence, we're actually going to get 3 sides of these pillars and beams. Same there, and just specify that with the customer, who's in charge of painting it, and am I supposed to bid that out or not. If you're supposed to paint both sides, if this is 50, you have to go to the other side and also count that as 50, so it'd be a total of 100. Now, a fence that is a flat side, it's going to look like these examples, to where it's just flat, there's no beams, and that is going to be the other option, which is spraying or brushing and rolling fence flat side. So you'd figure out how many linear footage is flat side, how many linear footage is the side with the beams, and put that into your sheet, and you'd put that down here. This itemized option is going to tell you the price. Okay, so went over decks, fences. Another thing that you'll get is a pergola, And remember, we don't do semi-transparent stains, so you would need to, if we were painting this one, say, hey, we're going to switch it to solid color, which basically looks like paint. Standard that we're going to use is downspout post, something that you're painting that has 3 to 4 sides. So obviously we got 10, 20, 30, 40, and then you'd measure how long that is. These are 10 foot long. So you'd want to count each one of these. We'd say we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. 20 times 10 is 200. We can count these as 2.5, so every 2 is 5. So we got 5, 10, 15, 20. Now we're at 220. So let's go ahead and put that in there. And then we would also need to do each one of these up top. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 times 10 is going to be another 120. 220 plus 120 is 340. And that counts for everything on this pergola. So that's how you're going to estimate a pergola that's got this style. You just use that standard. So an important thing to note in this itemized option is it doesn't tell you how many gallons we're actually planning to use. What this column is telling you how many units it is. So for this option with this amount of linear footage is going to be 17 units. And then here's the paints, and it's important to look at this body paint, trim paint, stain type. Now when you do something like a pergola, it's using a standard that we use on a house. So if we were to switch this to something that we would use for staining, like let's do fence flat side, then you're gonna want to change this where it says stain type. When you change this, it'll change the price. However, if you do something like other trim and you're planning on staining it, you're gonna have to go to the trim paint. And if you do something that's related to body paint like siding spray, this is going to make a difference if you change it. So you need to keep that in mind. So for this example, we're using downspout post side with 3 or 4 sides. And you're going to use trim paint here to figure out the price. So if we go to, this bare solid color stain deck plus, you'll notice that changes the price. So keep that in mind when you're using this down here, that you're changing the one that actually makes a difference in the price, and you don't actually know how many gallons it's bidding it out for. You can reverse engineer it and find out, but that's just an important thing to know about it. So for this pergola, you can see it's $11.50 with the bare solid stain deck plus, and if we were to use super deck from Sherwin, it jumps it up just a little bit, $11.76. And then lastly, for wood replacement, we do some wood replacement. All the options are here. First story trim, second story trim, first story regular siding, and second story if it's Hardie board or cement. We also got first story fascia, second story fascia, and there's also the fascia that has the gutter on it. And so if we look at here, this fascia right here is just regular fascia. This fascia has that gutter on it. So there's 2 different standards for that, and you do everything in linear footage for that. And then you would just want to separate first story eave, second story eave, anything, the eave is right there, whether it's first or second story, and then we have railings, and you'll put those into here. So let's say that they have, some first story trim, and there is 20 linear foot. You'll see it spits out a price for you, comes out to $424, and that's what we would charge them. If they can take advantage of a discount, they can get that. Something that's important with carpentry work, let's just say it's 5 linear foot. It only comes out to $100. We do have a minimum on our carpentry of $300. So even if they were just going to replace one tiny little piece of trim, we would put that it costs $300 because it's only coming to $213. You need to make sure you charge $300. And something that is unique with wood replacement, this is the only time that we're not going to use that rule of 5 to where we actually could put like 6, 7, or 8. So you can be a little bit more precise with the wood replacement, and that is how you estimate the house. Now, if you come down here, you're going to have some more pricing options for them. So price if the homeowner provides paint is going to be right here. So rather than putting like zeros here, it's going to spit it out right here what the actual cost is. And then if they wanted to do a full prime coat, so they want us to paint their house twice, once with primer and the second time with paint, that's what it costs. If, like again, if it's a white house like this, that's what I'd recommend. If they're going to paint it a super dark brown or gray or green, say they're painting a super dark green, I would recommend doing 2 coats of paint to try to resist the fading, and that's going to be the price if you're doing 2 coats of paint. You'll notice it's a different price for each, so pay attention to that. And for us, if they do full prime or full 2 coats, we bump their warranty from our standard 2-year up to the 5-year. But let's say that they wanted a 5-year warranty but don't want a full coat of prime or 2 coats. There's just a little bit of an upcharge for that extended warranty, and that would be the price. See, it's $35.38 versus $33.69. It's a little bit more if they want just the 5-year without doing a full coat of prime or 2 coats. So these are the other prices down here, and that's how you use the estimating sheet, and that's how you estimate the exterior of a house. Alright, so only 2 more things to cover. One of them is when you have a Tudor style home which shows trim like this, there's a couple things to keep in mind. One is check and see if the trim is 3D or if it's not 3D, and make sure you go over that with the homeowner. Now, this kind of trim would normally go under other trim, but when it's a Tudor style home, there's different techniques and ways you can paint it, which is going to make the labor a little bit less than your typical other trim. And because of that, we actually have some Tudor style standards. So if you look, we have 2. There's Tudor trim facing and Tudor trim 3D. So go over with the homeowner. The facing is going to be more cost effective. The 3D will cost a little bit more, but perhaps that is something that the homeowner wants. And you can toggle back and forth to show them the difference after you get the total linear footage of other trim. And you'll just put in, Tudor style trim facing, add this up. Who knows, it's like 400, 500 linear foot of trim. You can show them that price, and then to show them the other price, you simply just change it to Tudor trim 3D. And then the last thing that we'll cover is when it comes to semi-transparent stain, we don't do that. So what you'd need to do for this is let the homeowner know we have 2 options. One is we can do a solid color stain on it, or the other option is we can paint it. And I just wanted to go over how you'd bid both of those. So if we were doing solid color stain here, what you'd do is you'd measure out the surface area. So, we're going to put 200 for here. So you'd put 200, and this is solid color stain. So what you'll notice is it goes from 14 to 15 when I put that in there. And we're going to want to actually say that this is going to be solid color stain, not paint. Because unless you pick one of these options that is normally stain, the system doesn't know to change it to stain. And that would be like, if you're picking fence, flat side, or side with beams, or you're picking a deck option, then it's going to add in gallons for staining. But if you're picking an option that's, typically the house, it's going to add in extra gallons for the body. So if you want it to be correct, you need to see, okay, it's adding an extra gallon here, and then I would change this back to 14, and I would put 1 extra gallon here. And now change this guy over to the product of some solid color stain they want us to use, which let's just say it was Super Deck solid color stain, and that's how you would bid this out to do a solid color stain here. Now, let's say that they want to paint this. What you need to do is just double the amount of surface area, because we're going to do 1 coat of primer and 1 coat of paint. We had 200 just to do the solid color stain here. Just double that to 400, and that would account for changing it from what it is now to actually painting it. And that would account for actually painting it, just doubling that, and it already has the correct amount of gallons in there. You don't need to adjust anything, but that would be the 2 different ways that you could bid this out depending on what the client wants.